Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to be taking this VW Bug body. We're going to be cutting it in half and we're making a trailer out of it. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, just gluing the front of the Baja body on and getting it ready to cut the half to make the trailer. I want to get the structure of the body stable, so I decided to use a piece of styrene cut and shaped to the bottom before gluing it in place. Wasn't exactly sure how long I wanted the front to extend past the center section. I just ran it a bit long on the piece and we'll cut it down later. My cut line is going right along the back of the door. I'm using a little handheld saw made by Alpha. It has a very thin kerf and does a really good job of cutting smooth openings. The sunroof needed to be filled in, so a piece of paper was used to trace the outline and then transfer that over to a piece of styrene. The sunroof insert doesn't need to be perfect fit, but it wanted to really spend some time to get it as close as possible. The more styrene and less filler you have, the better off you are. The back needed that rounded shape. Now that really gives that feel of a Volkswagen Bug. So what I'm doing here is taking a piece of MDF, gluing two pieces together before cutting it down to a rough shape. Just need to do a little bit of cleanup on the edges to get rid of the saw marks. I didn't have an exact dimension to go off, so I just basically took a pencil and traced an outside line. My belt sander was used to start working down the trace line. Typically I sand down to the line and then to the other before making the transition profile between the two lines. The Dremel Multi-Max tool does a really good job of transitioning between the belt sander and some hand sanding in order to get that profile as smooth as possible. The final part is just a little bit of hand sanding before the mold is ready for vacuum forming. I like to have a really positive edge to cut on with the vacuum molds. So here I'm taking a razor blade and using that edge to cut along the styrene as accurately as possible. A little bit of compressed air and it generally just pops right out. I thought about the opening for getting into this trailer. My first thought was the doors or maybe the hood. Finally, I decided to use the vacuum molded piece as the opening. So what I'm doing here is taking the small handsaw to cut off a section at the bottom. This section will be permanently attached to the bug body, and the top section will hinge down. To help hold this section in place, I'm taking some thin strips of styrene and gluing them to the body. The surface needs to be roughed up a bit before gluing the micro hinges in place. I want to put this wall in place almost where the firewall would go in order to box in the trailer. So to hold the lid closed, rare earth magnets were used. I'm just taking some thicker pieces of styrene, shaping them down to get the contours of the body, and then gluing them in place. I decided to go with 1/14 scale semi-truck axles. The semi-truck axles come in different widths. This is more like of a medium axle from what I've seen, and it tends to work best with most of the trailers I build. For the trailer structure, I just used mostly brass tubing, along with some scale metal supply tabs to hold the body in place. Aluminum pieces were made to match the holes in the body. This way I can silver solder the structure in place without melting the body. Holes needed to be made in order to place in some stainless steel capillary tubing. So this tubing is what I'm using to hold the two halves together and make up the structure of the chassis. This coupler is from Pushrod 3D and it says designed to go with the axial trailer hitch. I really wanted to make this chassis pretty simple. You know, the body has a lot going on, so chassis shouldn't distract from that. A little light sanding to key up the area in preparation for applying the dolphin glaze. These little latches are also from Pushrod 3D. I was thinking through what type of latch to use for holding the vacuum form piece in place. I decided to go with kind of a common latch for a truck toolbox. I figured that would give the best look. The vacuum form piece on the end is just kind of a plane. So drip rails were added to the top along with running board extensions on the bottom. I took a few minutes trying to figure out how best to build the running board shape. In the end, a section of styrene was glued in place and shaped to the body. A rotary tool was used to match the profile, and a small piece of square styrene was glued to the bottom to round out the shape. If you break up the parts into smaller chunks, it's often easier to figure out how best to build them. So here's a dolphin glaze. It's a two-part material similar to Bondo, but it's more of a top coat filler since it has less air pockets in it when you're done. It's supposed to be self-leveling. It sands amazing and it does a really good job of filling in the voids. The only issue I have with this stuff is that it takes so little of the cream hardener, and the first batch I made set off pretty quick. The second batch used a little bit less cream hardener, and I think it gave me a little more working time. As you can see, this stuff just sands beautifully. It really does give a good transition between the pieces and filling the small voids. It's way, way better than using the air drying spot putty. When I spread this out, it ended up going right over the holes. I thought it'd be pretty easy to push them through, but I guess it really does show just how good this stuff is. I ended up taking cutters to remove the nub from the inside before I could push that piece through those holes. So the chassis just got a quick coat of satin black, and all the components were put back in place. In order to prep the surface for paint, the long process of wet sanding was started. I started with a 320 grit and worked down to a 600 grit. Even though only the doors and a small section of the hood remain white, I decided to paint the entire body white before going over it with the VW blue color to make it really pop. So the headlights were just painted red with some Tamiya paints. The VW logo was glued in place, and the wipers were prepped for a spray chrome. Went back and forth on how best to cover the windows. I thought a Lexan that was tinted or painted black on the inside. In the end, I just chose to cut thin pieces of styrene and paint them black from the outside. So the last part of this is just adding the taillights. I have some 3mm LEDs, and I'm just taking some 390 ohm resistors to match up with the 6 volts coming from the BEC. I'm placing one resistor for each light, and I'm going to have another matching resistor that is tied to both LEDs. I found this combination gives the best look for the brake light, so it's not too bright. So here I am taking a small wire, starting that directly on the LED, and then a ways down the line put the resistor in place. You want to really pay attention to where these resistors go so as not to put too much stress on them, say bending around a corner. I chose a nice flat spot on the bottom so I could glue them down and have it well protected. So I'm using a Tessa tape here to wrap the wires. So Tessa tape is a friction tape. It's commonly used for electrical work. It's basically like abrasion resistance. It's very similar to hockey grip tape. Just add a small dab of E6000 glue to hold the lens in place. Just a couple final details like adding the chrome paint on the door handles, installing the windows, and finally the windshield wipers. This is a fun little project to help a friend out. I always enjoy building trailers, especially odd ones like this. Lots of fun projects coming up. Until then, we'll see you in the rocks.